data migration. So if you're hoping for something different, it's next door. So welcome. Thanks for coming.
Stay anyway.
Yeah, stay. This hopes to be exciting as we go. So today we're just going to kind of go and do an introduction to the panel members, and then we've got some questions here I've got that we're going to walk through, and then time permitting, we'll open things up. These guys have a phenomenal wealth of information on data migration, data manipulation, data importing, anything you do in extraction and transformation and loading and how you might do that is great. And all four of them have a little bit of a different tilt, so we're going to have different ideas about how things work, but I think that's going to be really interesting. So why don't we do this? We'll just start here and work our way across. So kind of what we're interested in is the firm you're in, products that you focus on, what you do with the firm, just anything that might kind of add to this would be great.
My name is Steve Snyder. I am from the Austin, Texas area, and I work for Baker Tilly on the Baker Tilly digital wing of the company. And for the last few years, I've been doing implementation in our home and commercial services and construction vertical. So I've done quite a few beginning to end construction implementations, along with just standard intact implementations and home service implementations.
Thank you.
My name is Scott Irwin. I'm the owner of Aktion Associates. Our specialty is within the Sage world is really Sage CRE, and we have a lot of Sage 100, Sage 300, and now Sage Intacct Construction customers. And we're really setting out to try and automate the migration of those legacy construction accounts to the next gen, Sage Intacct Construction. So that's my area of expertise.
My name is Hugh Stewart with Platform Transition. We are the premier migration platform for Sage Intacct. We migrate from about 77 different legacy systems to Sage Intacct. And about 5 years ago, Dennis Stayskill approached me to see if I could design a methodology for Timberline, which I knew nothing about. So he introduced me to a young fellow by the name of Bruce Vanderzide, who would over the next 3 years become one of my best friends. And he taught me over about 3 years everything I understood about how Timberline works, what construction customers need, and how they see the world differently than everybody else. And so we've been able to develop a couple of different scopes, different levels of detail that support about 17 legacy systems to Sage Intacct Construction.
Thanks, I'm David Firth. I'm with DataBlend. I am not the founder, but I was until very recently the CEO. We just got acquired, so different title. But nonetheless, DataBlend is an integration platform as a service. So most of the work we do is around sort of continuous integration, but that same platform can be used for doing the migration of data from any source to Sage Intacct. By way of background, though, I started my career in the construction industry, so this is definitely an industry that I have a strong affinity to, a lot of familiarity. After spending many years in the field, I was the head of IT for Turner Construction, and so again, this is sort of a world that I'm very familiar with. Looking forward to it.
So let me start with the first detailed question. We'll start with you and work our way back. So the big thing that we hear constantly is level of detail, number of years. How much do you need? How do you decide what's relevant, what you need? How do you communicate that with your prospective client or the client that you're working with? So we just want to know really what's the guidance you give and how might it change, or what are the variables that cause that change?
Yeah, it's not actually an easy question to answer. I mean, these guys may feel a little bit differently than me. I mean, I think generally speaking, everybody always wants to sort of hold on to as much data as they can. But if you go back and you ask them how often they accessed it, that sort of going way back, they probably tell you not that often. So I think fundamentally, right, it's sort of, you always like to start with just being able to do period over period reporting, as you're sort of bringing it over. So that's kind of where we like to start. What is the reason that you want that access to that data? really sort of determines how often or how far back you really need to go. So that's kind of
Yeah, it's great. Hey, what do you think?
I understand now why they chose today at this time for this session to happen. So I have a very controversial view. The reason my company exists is because I'm an angry customer that never stopped being angry. I was in the construction environment, and when I had to come over, I needed all of my data, and I didn't want anybody telling me what I couldn't have. So our company strongly believes that whatever you want, if you can pay for it, we can get it done. In my case, I needed 700,000 lines, 7 years of history from my legacy systems. The most we've ever moved for a customer because they needed it was 40 years. And on the subledger, 28 years was what a particular customer absolutely would not come to Intacct without. So my position is, I'm not in a position to tell you how much you need. You know how much you need, and our job is to get it for you. Nobody can tell you different. So there's a lot of passion there, if you notice. We kind of have a strong feeling about it. So the idea is that we as service providers shouldn't tell you. And here's where I'm going to get in trouble. They can't do it because they haven't invested in that particular technology for many. It's just not the purpose of the way the software exists. But the construction folks at Sage had the vision to come to some of the best participants in the marketplace and try to get a solution designed for you. And my apology is that it's taken 5 years to get to this place. So my hope is that I get to inspire all of the other VARs in this space to be able to give people what they want. Whether they use us or not, we're interested in having folks be able to get what they need and what they want. And if you can't afford it, then find ways to compromise. But always start with your vision and your ideals in mind. Thank you.
I think we've been doing file conversions manually for about 40 years. And, at the end of the day, we have a lot of different methods for getting master records out of a legacy system and getting them into a next-gen system. Sometimes we can do transactional file, open transactions, and we can bring those over. I think 90% of the people that go live with Sage systems end up getting balances for their GL and their job costs. And so we set out to basically attempt to do all of that. But in addition, what we wanted to do is we wanted to bring over the detailed GL transactions that were in balance with the job cost split. And again, we've been working on that process for about 2.5 years. And again, with the number of switch settings on the legacy side, the number of switch settings on the Intacct side, there's a lot that can, on the mapping process, there's a lot that can go wrong. But our goal is to be able to automate either of those. We want beginning balances. We want to do that in an automated fashion, a calculation and a load of the beginning balance. If you want to do it in detailed transactional state, and have our detailed GL and balance with the job cost, that's an outcome that we're trying to deliver for our clients.
Yeah, I think anybody that's been through a standard Intacct implementation understands the kind of work you have to put into it on your perspective of pulling data, even providing summary data for our standard methodology for Intacct migration, summary net change, and then simple open items that transition and go live, open AP, open AR. That's fine for your standard Intacct setup, but when you're wanting to maximize construction, you're wanting to maximize your projects and kind of have a seamless transition in Intacct. It's a lot of data. It's I wouldn't call it intimidating, but it's just everyone has their day job, and providing that much data into Intacct and then to get into the system can be rather difficult, because when you're looking at maximizing your reporting, maximizing your ability to use things like WIP management, vendor compliance, there's just a lot of data points and a lot of records you need to provide. And I would recommend to anyone that's new to construction or getting ready to start an implementation of that, make that one of your first discussions that you have with your implementer, just that level of detail that you need when you go live into Intacct. Because for some folks it's fine. Some folks are like, hey, it's great, all of our new projects are going to go into Intacct, they're going to look pretty seamless, because we're starting fresh in Intacct. But for folks that have like, hundreds of progress build projects, how are these going to look when you start? So that data needs to be, it needs to be provided, it needs to be input into Intacct at any more granular detail levels than just, summary entries to get you where you're starting.
Can I steal the mic back? I just, I think one of the things that's also really important to consider is why do you need to have it in Sage Intacct, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, sort of period reporting is probably a critical reason. But if you just need access to the data, right, there's also other options available to you, right? That data does not need to end up in Sage Intacct for you to be able to have complete visibility into it by project, right, by customer, all the way down to the detail of a particular purchase order. So just food for thought, and doing that can be a lot less expensive.
Let me follow on to that and just kind of throw one from left field. I'm just asking a question. I was sitting talking with someone yesterday, and we were talking about AI and all the great things that are going to happen with AI. And this person said to me, the AI models, those large language models, really become effective after a certain amount of time. That you need to have data to really have it effectively drill through the data and become. So that was the first time I've heard that there might be a limitation or things to consider. But have you heard that? Did you guys think about that? What would you recommend a client if they said, hey, we really want to move and start using some of the AI components, and we want to go back and go through our history? And is 1 year going to be enough? What do you need to do to really take advantage of AI?
Well, I can't speak to the AI function, but you hit on a really good value point. And the good thing is that I have much to talk about with my friend David.
That's why they had us sit next to
That's why they had us sit next to each other. So, in the front row is my good friend and business development director, Janine Lowen. She's had the pleasure of having 350 plus exit interviews. And the number one comment we get from people who have dimensionalized their history is they have a higher return on their ROI for Sage Intacct. So they are able to appreciate all of the dimensional reporting for 20 years of job cost history, if that's what they want, day one. So piecemealing and stitching data from other sources, I get it. Budget is a problem, we hear you, and we want to make things affordable. At the same time, we hear from customers that their teams adopt the software better and faster when the history they care about and they recognize are in the system. That does not mean everything, because not all data is useful in the system, and this is where we agree. What I'm here to tell you is that as much as it takes for your team to be comfortable and adopt the system with excellence, that's what you get to decide. This is where we want to give you power and choice so that you can get as much. And you should not be limited by what we can't get into the system for you.
Yeah, on the timing, I have two things that we've been talking with clients about. I think the first thing is, if you go back and look at the original source of the transactional data, the IRS, the auditing, the bonding companies, if you look at that, you'll find that keeping 7 to 10 years of that data in its original source. That means with access to the original source of the Timberline data, not the migrated data that goes into. So again, we provide a repository of that pristine Timberline data after we complete the file migration. So the second time period that we hear is you're looking at these AI and these large language models. What we're hearing them say is they want 6, 7, 8 years of transactional data to load the LLMs. And so, again, I don't know if you only put 3 years worth of that transactional data, what impact does that have on the LLM? But what we're being told is it really takes at least 7 years worth of that transactional, detailed transactional.
Steve, Baker Tilly is a big CPA firm, right? So from that perspective, what are you as a CPA firm saying to people? It could be different. Scott's got a big, huge bar for software, but you have CPAs behind you where you maybe want to talk to you about what do we tell our clients, what what does that exactly mean?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to determine what data that you want to have access to in Intacct. You know, how are you going to have access to it in your legacy systems? Our general methodology is just 2 years worth of 2 full years of history just for initial comparative analysis. I mean, from your perspective as the client, you just have to weigh, you know, is this effort, you know, worth the squeeze? Putting all this effort into moving the data into Intacct, do we really need it? Are we going to have access to it somewhere else? You know, so I think it's just at the beginning of your implementation, even during the sales cycle, when you're bringing it into Intacct and kind of foreseeing how you're going to do that implementation, you kind of got to establish that with your partner. You know, how much you're going to bring in, and you know how they're going to help you with it.
Follow on to that is construction clients. What's different about a construction client than a manufacturer or distribution? So what do you have to take into account that is maybe unusual?
I would say with the construction, we've seen things on POs this week. We've seen stuff on project contracts. So not only is geohistory at a minimum, geohistory down to the project cost type, cost code level necessary. But if you're wanting to, you know, as a project manager, be able to look at your purchase orders from start to finish, you know, you want to bring in, you know, pre-go live amounts for purchase orders. You want to do that for project contracts. All of your vendor validation we've talked about this week. You want to bring in that information that has to get moved over. Project estimates, you know, all of your projects in order to utilize WIG management and change management, they have to have that project estimate in the system, so that's going to come over from your legacy system into Intacct. Yeah, so it's just a lot of data point, and like we usually recommend it for just your open projects. I know some folks up here that they can help you if you need that completed job or job history, you know, especially some ledger information for those jobs, and they can help you, you know, bring that over if necessary. And then to maximize a lot of the reporting for construction for your ongoing open projects when you go live and Intacct, a lot of that subledger activity actually has to be, you know, replicated. So when you're looking at a project contract, you know, like this amount of the contract was billed before we went live, like that needs to be replicated with Intacct in order for you to at least report on it from, you know, a lot of the out-of-the-box reports that are provided. You same thing with your purchase orders. You know, you want to look at your original purchase order amounts. You want to look how much costs that you've incurred on that purchase order. You want to look at, you want to know at the time of go live how much you paid on that purchase order. So that's all information that has to come into Intacct, one way or the other. And you know, standard methodology of filling out templates and importing them into Intacct can be very arduous.
So Scott, I know you have multiple applications within your organization. Construction, different?
Yeah. I think I was thinking, we have, architectural engineering, construction, wholesale distribution, manufacturing. What's different about the construction data is really the detailed GL job cost with reconciliation. That's we don't have that. I mean, that's what I would say is getting that right, getting it in balance, by period at the detailed transactional level. That's what makes the final migration unique for contractors. I mean, that's the end goal, is that's in balance by period.
I agree with both the answers. I'm just going to go up a notch and stop strategically. So, having completed now 2,600 plus migrations to Sage Intacct, we can tell you that the very biggest difference that makes construction clients so different and unique is that there are 2 constituents that you have to migrate for. So effectively, you're doing 2 migrations that both of these gentlemen have confirmed. One is what we call an explicit migration. It is for a validation standard that is generated by your legacy system. Trial balance, AP agent detail report, AR agent detail report, etc. Those are reports that are going to make our finance teams happy, or accounting folks, or stakeholders. And then there's a completely separate constituent that is just as important, and these are our project managers. So the operations teams of construction companies require a completely different set of validation standards that we have to be able to respond to. And this is where, again, I agree, job cost, work build, open commitment amounts, open contract amounts, understanding the role of change orders, and then all of the validation standards at those levels that make that organization work and function. And to the degree that you have both stakeholders at the table, this is what we've learned. You can't do this migration with IT department like you can with insurance. You have to do this with the accounting team working lockstep with your project managers, and they are helping to design the quality of the data and the level of detail that make them happy. So I can't tell you how much is good enough. You tell me how powerful your project managers are versus your finance team, and that will tell us whether we do a trial balance migration on the GL side and full subledger rebuild on the project management job costing side. Does that make sense? So you and the dynamics of your organization and how those two constituencies play with each other will help to inform at what level the migration makes sense. And you can pick and choose, because what's neat about a referential versus an explicit migration model is you have the ability to choose, and they're not connected. So we have people that will choose a 1-year trial balance on the GL, but they'll go back 20 years on 20 projects on job costs because that's what makes their WIP work. And that's what's gonna work for them. So, you know, we wanna make sure that you have the power to design with your teams and the right stakeholders at the table. And they're the ones that are designing how the migration should flow.
Nothing to add.
Let me go, we'll move on. Maybe Scott, this was a question to start with you on. We have customers coming up to us from the product side of the house all the time saying, why can't we get a data migration? And data migration should be easy. So my question to you is just to try to give the audience an idea of how complex these are. My first kind of part A of you is, you are the CEO of one of the biggest bars in the country, and you're sitting up here talking about data migrations. Why?
It's, when we set off to do this, sometimes I ask myself, do I really need to take on this technical challenge at this point in my career? But what I can say to you is we've been doing file conversions for 40 years, and it's one of the parts of the business that's kind of been the bane of my existence. It's something that's just never been done really well by our company, or I think bars in general. And so we had an opportunity to invest in, into an ETL tool set. We took this on, and again, it is. I think if what we're trying to do is get this down into if we can do a detailed file if we can bring over the detailed transactions, and we can do that, get that down, and do it in less than 20 or 30 hours, we would have done something that we've never been able to do before. And so that's why we're doing it. And what I can say, there's about 88 tables in Timberline, and there are about 26 tables that have to be created in sequence that are just job cost transactions themselves. And you gotta do it in sequence. It was kind of like, where did all these transactions come from when we got into this thing? It all centers around the job cost sequence, the data creation, and how those transactions are created. And doing that correctly is really at the core of being able to do this.
Which is great. Just to give us a basic idea, and I like it from all of you, is the project that got me there, or Hugh, your project, Dave, your project. If the customer's looking at, how big of a project are we talking about? Is it in hours, or years? Just so they know it's not, it's something you're not gonna do on the weekend. It's taking you how long to get to where you are to be able to talk like this.
I mean, we've been focusing just on Timberline Intacct. We haven't, we've been perfecting our tool set to just be able to do that. And again, a lot of it has to do with the state of the data when you go to do the migration. If they've got 10 custom fields in every single file, the mapping won't work. It all has to be redone. So it's what I would say to you is, if any of us could do a readiness assessment of your existing data and a discussion about, how many folders, how many columns, how many years, we can have a discussion with you, and we can quickly narrow this down to say, level of complexity, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those levels of complexity will directly correlate to, an idea of what the time and effort is going to be required to do.
In your investment, how many hours do you think you have in your tool?
We have 5,500 hours in the last 5 months.
So just as you get an idea out there, it is so difficult to do data conversions. You, same idea, I know you've been working on it. This is not something that people take on in their garage on the weekends.
I really appreciate the previous answer because we have had a different challenge in that where he's talked a lot about the technical challenges, which are significant. We've had more of a strategic challenge where one set of solutions don't work for everyone. So when we started this journey 4.5 years ago, we had 6 scopes. It was just too much. And we were actually planning for 9 because we could imagine a lot of different combinations of trial balances on the GL for the explicit migration, but detail in the referential migration for job costs and all that other stuff. And what we've come away with is we have settled on 3 different scopes. A simple scope that's effectively a trial balance scope that is there to stand people up as quickly as we can get them stood up, and they can move on with their life because they're not attached to the detail. And I think we can all agree that there is a profile of customer that is okay just moving on with that. There is a mid-range of GL detail with enrichments where people want to be able to go back and justify their WIP because they have to. And I've learned over the last 12 years of doing this that it is more expensive to question why somebody needs their data. My job is to let you have your reasons for needing it, and if I can deliver it, great. If I can't deliver it, I can refer you to somebody who can, or we can have some kind of other compromise discussion. And then there are the people that absolutely need to justify every single AP transaction that shows up on their GL enrichment with a rebuilt invoice and payment on the subledger. Non-negotiable. Will not move to Intacct, will not press go, will not pay $200, will not go to jail, right? They'll pay $200. So those 3 different scopes are radically different in the amount of time it takes to deliver and the price. And so, it can range anywhere from right now, my hope is that as technology continues to advance and we can include technology in the process, the prices can all go down because we will have replication, we will have models that can learn from these things. But as of this conversation, I can tell you, probably low end is somewhere in the low teens, high end is mid 40s for a single entity going at the biggest scope. And I don't want to go crazier than that.
Yeah, I actually had a question I think was got at. I'm just curious, because you sort of have done a lot of Timberland work, you're making, people are changing to Sage Intacct, right, to your customers. And I think I heard you say that you'll keep that sort of old instance going, right? So in that scenario, there's no reason for migration. So it's kind of an interesting option that I just, it's important for everybody to sort of be aware of, right, that you sort of pointed out.
No, again, our discovery there was the requirement to have the code accessible in its original state. It wasn't adequate to have it in a migrated state. So we just, hey, here's a 7-year historical access to your Timberland data. Even
I was gonna say, so long that's an interesting nuance, right? That's something you kind of
didn't know that was a requirement.
So that's kind of interesting. So Stephen, all you guys, are there things that like nuance you figure out? You're like, I didn't know that was required, right? This was something that just kind of hit me. Are the things that just kind of pop up after doing hundreds of these things? They're like, that's interesting. Didn't know.
Like anything else, any other business, some of the people say, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't need that. Can you help me recover it, bring it back if I do need it? I don't want to keep it. I don't want to keep it environmental. So half the people just said, even though it's a requirement, it's not needed by them. So get back to the customer. We'll direct you on that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, with that said, I mean, you can do 10 different construction implementations and you'll have 10 different sets of requirements and needs for the customer. So my biggest advice for a potential clients, folks switching over to Sage Construction, just have that conversation early, even during the sales cycle. As soon as you start the implementation, bring that up with your implementer so that they understand. Don't assume things are gonna be a certain way, because like I said, every way has been a little different depending on the customer requirements. So just be vocal about that and, kind of put that in the implementer and the partner's court, to help you solve that issue. I would just say don't wait until the week of go live or the week after go live and wonder why some of your reporting's not working the way you want it to. And also, I would recommend that too while you're going through the implementation pre-go live. Get some data in there for some of your real projects to see what it looks like in Intacct, how you can interact with it in Intacct, so you kind of have that idea or expectation once you do go live in the system, and the growing pains aren't quite as bad.
And almost have sort of two people involved, right? The person that says what they want to migrate and the person asking why you want to migrate, I think is also an important consideration, just to challenge that, right? So you said, you should be able to say yes, and I agree with that, but at the same time, you should always challenge why. What's the value, right? Is there a regulatory requirement? Then obviously you're gonna have to do it, right? If it's not in a regulated industry that you're doing the work for, you don't need it, again, really challenge yourself. Because the other thing that you heard is, I can move anything, and we all can get anything you want, but it will cost you, right? There's no question, if you wanna go back that far, it's not inexpensive.
So if you sit down, are there 3 or 4 things risk-wise you look and go, hey, I know doing this, there are 3 or 4 things I'm always worried about. They're just things that I know are gonna come up, that a client never thought about, they are a challenge for me, what do I do?
Let's start with you, because I actually have much for this one.
Phrase that one more time for me, Glenn.
So you sit down with
3
client.
or 4 things.
Yeah, what are some risk areas that just throw up red flags that you would worry about?
Again, like an example of, the way that people use Timberline. They used it in unconventional ways, right? And they decided when they put their committed costs in, they were just gonna put it in for $1 because on every single, because they didn't know what it was. And so to low committed costs, that's a real problem. And we have to reconcile committed costs to actual cost,